Book the First. Poverty. Chapter 1. Sun and Shadow. 30 years ago, Marseille lay burning in the sun one day. A blazing sun upon a fierce August day was no greater rarity in southern France then than at any other time, before or since. Everything in Marseille and about Marseille had stared at the fervid sky and been stared at in return until a staring habit had become universal there. Strangers were stared out of countenance by staring white houses, staring white walls, staring white streets, staring tracts of arid road, staring hills from which verdure was burnt away. The only things to be seen not fixedly staring and glaring were the vines drooping under their load of grapes. These did occasionally wink a little, as the hot air barely moved their faint leaves. And that was the first paragraph of Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens, the book that everybody seems to have chosen for me to read. Well, not everybody. Some people did choose to try and curse me with Oliver Twist. But here we have Little Dorrit. The book has won, and this edition that I will be reading is 826 pages. I have discovered that there is an excerpt from the life of Charles Dickens at the back. From what I can see, the extract at the back is about Dickens' early life spent in a debtor's prison. Little Dorrit is a book that I believed I had read, and I thought that I might talk to you about the history today. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out much about it, other than it was published from 1855 to 1857 and was Dickens being critical of certain offices of the time. I have gone back and I have watched two of Katie's videos about Little Dorrit. The first from 8 years ago, when I believe she did What the Dickens, and she called Little Dorrit her third favourite Dickens novel, talked about Amy Dorrit and talked about all of the characters within its pages, and I could not remember half of what I'd read. I believed for many years that I had read the entirety of this book, and it was only last week when I was recording my video that I found I'd only made it to page 214, which was why I asked if I should read this next or if I should read Oliver Twist. I'm glad that people chose Little Dorrit, because having watched Katie's original video about this book, I had read the two books that she called her top two, so it would make sense to read this one. I then went back and watched Katie's video from a few months ago when she was doing the Mega Dickens read-along, and how this book had sat between Hard Times and A Tale of Two Cities and was so lengthy, and how this is such a good place to get into Dickens. And I have to say that from reading that first paragraph there and it being so long since I tried to read it, let's see if it tells us when this edition came out. So this edition was published by Vintage in 2008 and is probably the year that I got it, because I can remember trying to read it and, well, like I say, I thought that I'd read it. I know that I hadn't read it then. I hadn't read it in 2008. I didn't try it in 2008. I didn't get very far that year, because I can remember us talking about some of our favourite writers at the writers group, and I was saying how I like Dickens and reading a passage about the circumlocution office and the way that Dickens would formulate his sentences and how I particularly enjoyed that. At the time when I was reading this book, I don't think that I was actually taking in what was being written, and I think that could be said a lot for a lot of the classic literature, the Victorian classics that I tried to read when I was in my teenage years, because I would read it from this lens of having to annotate everything and having to examine it and think about what was being said and the context behind it. So I wasn't actually thinking there was any sort of story going on. I wasn't noticing plot or anything like that. I was simply looking at it thinking, well, how can I analyse this line? And I felt like that's what you had to do with Dickens. Whereas now, when I go back and try to read it, I'll be reading it under a completely different lens of an adult who recognises Dickens was just trying to entertain and hoping that I will be entertained by this book. I also have to say that It was the covers of the vintage classics editions that completely changed the way I thought about Dickens. If we look at this, to me, this always seemed incredibly dark and grim, and so I felt like that was what I was going to get from this book, this very serious possible tragedy. On the back we have it saying, his masterpiece among many masterpieces. I can't say for sure. I can't say whether I can remember certain characters or anything like that, because I just don't remember the book well enough. But I have to admit that having watched Katie's videos earlier today, it has reinvigorated me to read this. And so I have come up with a plan, as it's not going to be happening in October. I do plan on reading Little Dorrit by the end of the year, but I think I'm going to do what I did with David Copperfield a few years ago, and that is I am going to separate this book into the sections it was originally published in way back when, and I am going to read one of those sections per day, which should take me to about 19 days. I don't yet know whether I should annotate my copy. What do you think? Should I go to the effort of analysing this book in the way I did David Copperfield? Because I didn't analyse that book, and I've said one of the things that I thought what I did with myself was have conversations with myself. So I'd point out when something had made me laugh, or whether I thought there was a supernatural undertone to something, or, you know, talked about Dickens' obsession with clocks. Should I do that here? Fill it with post-it notes and just annotate it with my thoughts as I'm going through? Or do I just try and read it for the fun of it this time? Let me know what you think about that. This was the book that was chosen. I don't know much about the history of it. I know what characters are forthcoming, and I am enthusiastic about it, having watched a few people talk about this book and having read a few reviews on Goodreads and seen when its position is there. Like I say, I am looking forward to this now and hope to get this read by the end of the year. I didn't think that I was going to be reading a Dickens this year, but I'm pleasantly surprised to be doing so. Let me know what you think. Should I try and annotate this book, post-it note it, all that stuff that I did with David Copperfield, or do I just read it for the fun of it? Have you read Little Dorrit? Did you enjoy it? Tell me some of your favourite things about this book. No spoilers, please, although, as I always say, it has been 170 years since this book came out, so if that did happen, it happens. There's nothing I can do about it. But for now, that's me. Little Dorrit is the book that you have chosen, and I am grateful for that, so thank you. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, because until next time, that is all.